I've never been the kind of person to post online about personal experiences, let alone something like this. But after years of silence, I think I need to put it somewhere before it drives me insane. My story takes place along California's Highway 1, that iconic stretch of road that clings to the cliffs above the Pacific Ocean. Tourists know it as beautiful, one of the most scenic drives in America. For me, it's the place where I lost my best friend, and maybe my sanity too. This wasn't a ghost tour, or some campfire story, this was a real night in 2017, one I'll never forget as long as I live. That evening started innocently enough. My best friend Chris and I were driving down from San Francisco toward Big Sur. We had planned a spontaneous camping trip, just two guys, a tent, and a case of beer. We left late, later than we should have, because Chris had to finish up at work, and by the time we got past Santa Cruz the sun had already dipped below the horizon. The road was pitch black except for our headlights, the cliffs plunging into nothing on one side, jagged hills on the other. It was quiet, almost peaceful, except every so often I'd glance in the rear view and think I saw headlights tailing us, only for them to vanish around a curve. Chris noticed it too. He leaned forward, peering into the side mirror. "Dude," he said, "do you see that car behind us?" But when I looked again, nothing was there. I joked that maybe he was seeing things, but he swore someone was following. The weirdest part was that the moment we'd bring it up, the lights would vanish completely, like whoever it was didn't want to be noticed. Eventually, I sped up, wanting to put some distance between us and whoever might be playing games, but no matter how fast I drove, whenever I rounded a blind curve, the lights appeared again in the distance, always just far enough back that I couldn't make out the car's shape. We both laughed nervously, telling ourselves it was just another traveler, maybe nervous about passing in the dark. But deep down, I could feel something off. The Pacific stretched endlessly to our right, waves crashing far below, but I swear the sound seemed louder than it should have, like the ocean was climbing the cliffs, trying to swallow the road whole. The air felt heavy, damp, and when I rolled the window down, I swore I heard a faint humming sound beneath the surf, almost like a low voice murmuring. About an hour later, somewhere south of Carmel, we saw it, a small turnout by the edge of the road, one of those places where tourists stop to take photos. Chris asked me to pull over so he could take a leak. I wasn't thrilled about stopping in the dark, but I didn't want to argue. I eased into the turnout, killed the engine, and the world went silent except for the waves. Chris hopped out with a flashlight, heading toward the guardrail that overlooked the ocean. I stayed in the car, scrolling through my phone, when I realized something terrifying, the headlights that had been following us. They were stopped too, just down the road, their beams shining faintly through the fog. Someone was definitely out there, watching. I rolled down my window to call for Chris, but that's when I noticed it, the sound of his footsteps had vanished. The gravel crunching under his boots had stopped mid-stride. I grabbed my own flashlight and climbed out, calling his name. "Chris? You good?" No answer. Just the ocean, roaring louder now, the mist wrapping itself around me so thick I could barely see my own hands. My beam of light cut through the fog, illuminating the guardrail, the empty space where Chris should have been. His flashlight lay on the ground, still on, pointing out toward the endless black sea. But Chris himself? Gone. No splash, no scream, nothing. Just gone. Panic clawed at me. I shouted his name until my throat hurt, scanning every inch of that turnout. I even leaned over the guardrail, shining my light down the cliffside, but all I saw was the furious white foam of the waves crashing against the rocks. If he had fallen, I would have heard something. But it was dead silent, like the ocean had swallowed him whole without a trace. That was when I noticed the headlights down the road flicker out. Whoever had been watching us was gone. I called the cops immediately. They showed up about 30 minutes later, but by then the fog was so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet in front of you. They searched the cliffside, the rocks below, and even sent a patrol boat into the water at sunrise. Nothing. No body, no clothing, not even a footprint on the dirt by the guardrail. It was like Chris had been erased from existence. The cops treated me like a suspect at first, grilling me about whether we'd been drinking, if we'd argued, if maybe he'd run off on purpose. But eventually, they filed it under missing persons. That was the official story. Chris vanished on Highway 1, and no one ever found him. But that wasn't the end of it. A few weeks later, I started receiving emails from an anonymous account. No subject lines, just grainy photos attached. Every photo was of the coast, jagged cliffs, empty turnouts, long stretches of winding road. In one photo, I swear I could see Chris standing by the guardrail, staring straight at the camera. His clothes were the same as that night, his expression blank, like he didn't even recognize himself. Another photo was darker, but in the corner of the frame I could make out something else, a car. The same pair of headlights I'd seen tailing us, faint in the mist. I went to the police, showed them the emails, but the detective brushed it off as a sick prank. He said Photoshopped pictures weren't evidence of anything. They traced the email account, but it led nowhere, just a burner. Eventually, the emails stopped, but my nightmares didn't. I'd wake up hearing waves crashing outside my window, even though I live miles inland. Sometimes I'd hear the humming again, the same low murmur I heard that night, and it always seemed to be coming from just outside my bedroom window. Last month, something happened that made me finally decide to share the story. I was driving home late from work, and as I turned down my street, I saw them. Headlights in my rearview mirror. Too far back to make out the car, but always there, following. I pulled into my driveway, and the lights stopped at the corner, just out of sight. I sat in my car, gripping the wheel, heart pounding. Then, as the lights flickered off, I heard it, the crash of waves, impossibly close, and a voice whispering my name through the mist that wasn't supposed to be there. And when I looked toward my front porch, I froze. Because standing there, dripping wet as though he'd just climbed out of the ocean, was Chris. I grew up in Fresno, California, in a neighborhood that most people would describe as ordinary. Rows of modest one-story houses, tall sycamore trees lining the sidewalks, kids playing basketball in driveways. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to inspire ghost stories, but every block has its dark corners. For us, it was the abandoned house on Olive Street. Everyone in the neighborhood whispered about it, the way kids whisper about monsters under their beds, but none of us really knew the truth. That is, until I moved in. I wasn't supposed to. The place had been empty for years, its shutters sagging, paint peeling like old scabs. But in 2015, I was 23, broke, and desperate for somewhere cheap to live. The landlord, a man who seemed too eager to get rid of the property, offered me the house for less than half the rent of anywhere else in town. It's not in perfect condition, he admitted, not meeting my eyes. But it's livable. I should have asked why, but all I saw were dollar signs. Within a week, I had signed the lease and moved in my thrift store furniture. The first few nights were fine. Dusty, quiet, but fine. Yet there was a strange heaviness to the air inside the house, like every room was thick with something I couldn't see. My friends teased me, saying I was paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I would hear soft creaks upstairs, even though the house technically had no second floor, just a low attic crawlspace. Sometimes, when I passed the hallway mirror, I thought I saw movement that didn't match mine, like someone else was standing just behind me, shifting slightly out of sync. Then came the smell. It started faint, like damp wood or mildew. But by the third week, the odor had turned acrid, almost metallic. It clung to my clothes, lingered in my hair. No amount of cleaning could get rid of it. My neighbors, people I'd known since childhood, avoided talking about the house when I asked. They'd just shake their heads and say, "You should move." One old woman across the street, Mrs. Ramirez, pulled me aside one afternoon and whispered, "That place remembers things. Bad things. Don't stay after dark." She wouldn't elaborate, and the fear in her eyes made my stomach twist. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps in the attic. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth. At first, I convinced myself it had to be raccoons, but the steps were too heavy, too human. My heart pounded as I grabbed a flashlight and pulled down the creaky attic ladder. The smell hit me instantly, stronger than ever, like rust and rot. I climbed up halfway, shining my light across the dusty beams. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. But then I saw it. Scratched into the wooden beam closest to me were words, dozens of them, carved deep and overlapping like someone had spent years marking the same spot. They weren't random either. They were names. First names. Dozens of them. Some old-fashioned, like Martha and George. Some modern. My own name was there too, carved faintly near the bottom, even though I'd never set foot in the attic before. I slammed the ladder shut and didn't sleep a second that night. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was some elaborate prank from kids in the neighborhood. Maybe the landlord was in on it, trying to scare me away. But later that day, I got another surprise. A man in his 60s knocked on my door. He introduced himself as Robert and explained he used to live in the house with his parents back in the 1970s. His face was pale as he asked, "Do you ever hear singing?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone about the noises yet, but yes, sometimes late at night, I would hear what sounded like a woman's voice, humming an old lullaby in a language I couldn't place. Robert's hands trembled as he told me his younger sister had disappeared in that house, one evening after she'd gone up to the attic. She was never found. His family moved out shortly after, and no one had lived there for long since. Every tenant left within months. Except me. That night, the singing was louder than ever, drifting through the vents. I tried blasting music to drown it out, but the melody threaded its way through every sound, sweet but mournful, like it was calling me. I curled up on the couch with every light on, clutching a kitchen knife like it could protect me from whatever lived in that house. Around 3 a.m., the humming stopped, and the silence was worse. That's when I heard a whisper. Not through the vents this time, but right next to my ear, as though someone was crouched beside me. "Get out." I swung the knife wildly, but no one was there. Just shadows stretching across the walls, stretching longer than they should have, bending in ways that made no sense. The next morning, I packed a bag and swore I would never return. But when I stepped outside, I froze. All across my front lawn, in the dirt, dozens of names were carved again. The same ones from the attic. Freshly dug into the earth, including mine. That was enough. I left that day, never looking back. The landlord didn't even argue when I broke the lease. It was like he expected it. But here's the part that keeps me awake now, years later. A few months ago, I drove back through Fresno, just passing by my old neighborhood out of curiosity. The house on Olive Street still stood there, its shutters rotting, its windows dark. But there was something new. A young couple unloading boxes from a U-Haul. They were moving in, laughing, carrying their baby in a car seat toward the front porch. I rolled down my window, wanting to warn them, but before I could, I saw it. In the upstairs window, behind the cracked glass, a woman was standing. Pale, unmoving, watching. She lifted her hand and pressed it against the glass, and though it was impossible from that distance, I swear I heard it again. The lullaby. Soft, mournful, humming right into my bones. And as I drove away, I caught one last glimpse in my rearview mirror. The woman was no longer at the window. She was standing on the porch, just behind the couple, her hand resting on the baby's carrier. I never believed in curses or haunted places. I grew up in Los Angeles, where superstition was something you laughed about at dinner parties, a leftover remnant of old Hollywood ghost tales. But in 2019, I went camping in Joshua Tree National Park with 2 friends, and what I saw there has convinced me that some parts of California are not meant for people. There are places that don't just scare you, they wait for you, watch you, and once you enter, they don't ever really let you leave. I'm not sure if I'm even supposed to be telling this story, because sometimes I think whatever happened out there is still following me. It was late September when we set out, me, my friend Jake, and his girlfriend, Allison. We were all experienced hikers, but none of us had been to Joshua Tree before. The desert was starkly beautiful, endless stretches of rock formations jutting up like broken teeth, Joshua trees bending like twisted arms frozen in mid-reach, and a silence so profound it made you feel like you were walking on the surface of another planet. We set up camp near a cluster of boulders, miles from the nearest marked trail. Jake liked the isolation. "This way it's just us and the stars," he said, grinning. That night, the sky was unreal, billions of stars shimmering, the Milky Way so clear it felt like you could step into it. For a while, everything was perfect. But deserts are deceptive. They hold heat in the day and secrets at night. Around midnight, Allison shook me awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I sat up, listening. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but no, the air was still. The sound was faint, coming from somewhere beyond the rocks. A voice. High-pitched, calling for help. "Hello?" It was a man's voice, desperate, pleading. Jake woke up too, and without hesitating, grabbed his flashlight. "Probably a lost hiker," he said. But something about the tone made my stomach turn. The voice was too steady, too rhythmic, like it was repeating the same plea on loop. "Help me. Please." Over and over. We followed the sound, beams of light cutting through the dark. The desert stretched endlessly, and with every step, the voice seemed to stay just ahead, never closer, never farther. After 20 minutes of walking, Allison stopped. "This doesn't feel right," she said. Her voice trembled. "It's like it's leading us somewhere." Jake brushed her off, but even he was starting to look uneasy. Then suddenly, the voice stopped. Dead silence. No wind, no animals, not even the crunch of our boots felt real anymore. That's when we realized we were lost. The desert had a way of playing tricks on your sense of direction. The boulders all looked the same, the trees bent in identical ways. We couldn't find our campsite. Panic set in fast. Our water was back in the tent, and the temperature was dropping. We tried retracing our steps, but the more we walked, the more it felt like we were moving in circles. Hours passed like this, until we spotted something in the distance, the faint glow of a fire. Relieved, we hurried toward it, expecting to find another group of campers. But it wasn't a campsite. It was a single campfire, burning low, surrounded by rocks arranged in a perfect circle. No tent, no supplies, no people. Just the fire and something sitting beside it. At first, I thought it was a bundle of clothes, but as we got closer, I realized it was a backpack. A hiker's pack, worn and sun-bleached. Inside, we found a half-empty water bottle, a map so faded it was unreadable, and a camera. Jake flipped through the photos. Most were normal, scenic shots of the desert, selfies of a young man we didn't recognize. But the last photo made my blood run cold. It was taken at night, just like now, and in the background, barely visible in the firelight, were 3 figures. Us. Standing in the dark, flashlights in hand. The photo had been taken from behind us. Allison screamed and dropped the camera. We spun around, shining our flashlights wildly, but there was nothing there. Just desert and shadows. Jake cursed under his breath and kicked dirt over the fire, extinguishing it. We didn't talk as we stumbled back into the night, desperate to find any landmark, anything familiar. Eventually, by some miracle, we found our tent again just before sunrise. None of us slept. We just sat in silence, waiting for the light. The next day, we hiked back to the car without saying a word. The desert looked different in daylight, less threatening, almost innocent. But as we left, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every Joshua tree seemed to lean just slightly toward us, branches twisted in silent gestures of farewell or warning. I thought that was the end of it. We didn't tell anyone, not even the rangers, because what would we say? That a ghost lured us into the desert and took our picture? But a week later, Jake called me in the middle of the night, his voice frantic. "It's here," he whispered. I asked what he meant, but all I heard was heavy breathing, then the line went dead. The next morning, Allison told me Jake was missing. His car was in their driveway, his phone on the kitchen counter, but no sign of him. The police searched for days, but nothing turned up. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. Allison moved away shortly after, refusing to talk about it. I tried to move on, too, but strange things kept happening. I'd wake up to find my shoes covered in desert dust, even though I hadn't left my apartment. My phone gallery filled with black photos, dozens of them, time-stamped between 2 and 3 a.m. Once, I found a photo of myself sleeping, taken from the corner of my bedroom. Last month, I decided to return to Joshua Tree, alone. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd find answers, or maybe I was being pulled back by something I couldn't resist. I retraced our old route, searching for the fire circle. I found it, exactly as it had been, rocks perfectly arranged, ashes still smudged into the dirt, like the fire had never truly gone out. And there, sitting in the circle, was the camera. The same one we'd found before. I picked it up, hands shaking, and scrolled through the photos. The last image froze my blood. It wasn't of Jake, or Allison, or me. It was of someone else, someone standing in the desert, face pale, eyes black as coal, mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. But what made me drop the camera and run was the reflection in those eyes. Tiny and unmistakable. 3 figures, huddled together in the dark. Us. I haven't slept since. Because sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear it again. That voice in the desert. Calling. Pleading. Help me. Please. And every night it gets louder, like it's closer. Like it's standing right outside my door. I was never one for camping trips or rural adventures. I grew up in Oakland, surrounded by city lights and noise, and whenever friends suggested getting away from it all, I usually made excuses. But in the summer of 2020, after the pandemic had shut down everything, my nerves were frayed. My girlfriend, Naomi, convinced me a weekend at Lake Berryessa would be good for us. It's beautiful up there, she said. Quiet. No crowds. I had no idea that by saying yes, I was agreeing to something that would change me forever. Lake Berryessa sits tucked into the hills of Napa County, California. By day, it looks like paradise, glittering blue water, rolling green hills, and a sky so clear it feels like a painting. But there's a darkness there too. People don't talk about it much, but the lake has a history. Bodies found in the water, unexplained drownings, whispers of something deep beneath the surface. It was even the site of one of the Zodiac killer's attacks decades ago. I knew all that, but I told myself it was just old stories. People drown in lakes all the time. Coincidence. We arrived late on a Friday afternoon, the sun melting into gold across the hills. We pitched our tent at a secluded campsite right by the water's edge. For the first few hours, it was perfect, just the two of us, a cooler full of snacks, and the smell of pine in the air. As night fell, the stars appeared one by one, until the sky was crowded with them. I had forgotten how dark real darkness could be. In the city, you never get true blackness. Out here, it felt like the world ended a few feet beyond our firelight. Naomi loved it. She lay back on the picnic table, pointing out constellations. I tried to relax, but something about the silence unsettled me. The lake was perfectly still, like glass, not a ripple on its surface even though a breeze had picked up. It was Naomi who saw the lights first. Look, she whispered, sitting up. I followed her gaze. Across the water, just above the treeline, 3 pale orbs hovered in the air. At first, I thought they were drones, but they didn't move like drones. They glided in slow, deliberate patterns, almost like they were circling each other. Their glow was soft, but wrong somehow, more like bioluminescence than electricity. We both sat frozen, watching. After a minute, Naomi laughed nervously. Probably some kind of light show. Napa's full of weird art installations, right? I didn't answer. The lights drifted closer. By the time we snapped out of it, the orbs were directly over the lake, casting faint ripples of pale green across the water. Then, without warning, they plunged straight down, vanishing beneath the surface without a splash. The lake was still again. Naomi exhaled, trying to laugh, but her voice cracked. Okay, that was weird. We retreated to the tent, zipped it shut, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't stop listening. At some point in the night, I heard it, a low hum, deep and resonant, like something enormous moving beneath the water. Around 3 a.m., Naomi shook me awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Her face was pale, eyes wide. The humming was louder now, vibrating through the ground. And then we saw it. The tent glowed faintly green, as though something outside was shining a light through the fabric. We unzipped the door just enough to peek. The orbs were back, 3 of them, hovering silently over the water, closer to shore this time. They pulsed slowly, like breathing. Naomi grabbed my hand. "We should leave," she said. I agreed. We stuffed our things into bags and ran to the car, not bothering to pack properly. But when we reached the dirt road leading out, something strange happened. The road wasn't there. Or at least, it didn't look the same. The path twisted off in a direction I didn't recognize, lined with trees that hadn't been there before. I turned the car around, heart pounding, but every direction led to the same road, curving back toward the lake. It was like the land had rearranged itself while we slept. Naomi started crying softly. "This isn't real," she kept saying. "We're just tired." But the humming kept growing louder, and a pale mist began to roll in from the water, glowing faintly under the moonlight. We parked the car and tried to walk, thinking maybe we could find the main road on foot. But the farther we got from the lake, the more wrong everything felt. The trees were too tall, their branches twisting in shapes that reminded me of the Joshua trees I'd seen online, except these glowed faintly, their bark slick like wet skin. The air smelled metallic, almost like blood. Naomi's hand gripped mine so tightly it hurt. We walked for what felt like hours, but somehow ended up back at our campsite. The tent was gone. In its place, on the ground, were 3 perfect circles burned into the grass, each about the size of a dinner plate, arranged in a triangle. That's when the lights rose again from the lake, brighter than before. They moved toward us slowly, deliberately, and the humming turned into something almost like a voice, low, layered, speaking in a language that wasn't human. Naomi clapped her hands over her ears and screamed. I don't remember what happened next clearly. There was a flash, a sense of falling, and then, nothing. I woke up at dawn on the shore, alone. Our car was gone, along with Naomi. My phone was dead, but when I turned it on later, I found a single new photo in my gallery. It was of the lake at night, the 3 lights hovering above the water. In the corner of the image, barely visible, was Naomi, standing waist-deep in the lake, her face turned up toward the orbs, her eyes glowing faintly green. I called the police. They searched for days. No sign of her, no car, no evidence we'd even been there. They told me I must have hallucinated, maybe fell asleep and dreamed it all. But a week after I came home, I started waking up to the humming again, faint at first, then louder. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the mirror and for a split second, my eyes flash green. And last night, I got a text from Naomi. No message, just a photo. It's the lake again. The 3 lights. And this time, she's not standing in the water. She's standing behind me, her eyes glowing brighter, her mouth open like she's about to speak. Los Angeles is a city of contradictions. To outsiders, it's all palm trees, celebrities, and endless sun, but people who've lived there long enough know the other side, the forgotten places, the shadows between freeways, the history paved over by progress. I learned that truth the hard way in 2018, when I was working a late shift as a rideshare driver. What started as a routine night picking up drunk partygoers ended with me standing in the dark, inside a tunnel that wasn't supposed to exist, listening to something crawl toward me from the blackness. And I swear to you, I've never looked at the city the same way again. That night had been slow. A Lakers game had just ended, and the traffic was murder, so I avoided downtown and stuck to side streets. Around 1:30 a.m., I got a ping from a rider named M. The pickup location was odd, a vacant lot near Alameda Street, not far from Union Station. When I pulled up, the place was empty except for a man standing near the chain-link fence. He was tall, dressed in a dark hoodie, his face hidden in shadow. He climbed in the back without a word, and the car filled with a smell I can only describe as damp concrete. "Where to?" I asked. His voice was low, monotone, and oddly rehearsed, like someone reading lines from a script. "Take me to the end of the road." I frowned. "Which road?" He didn't answer. Just leaned forward and whispered, "You'll know it when you see it." Against my better judgment, I started driving. He gave vague directions, leading me deeper into the industrial district, past warehouses and graffiti-covered walls. The streets grew emptier, darker, until it felt like the city had evaporated behind us. After about 20 minutes, he told me to stop. We were at the mouth of a narrow, unmarked road that sloped downward between two abandoned factories. At the end was a massive steel gate, rusted and chained shut. A faded sign warned, "No entry, city property." The man got out without a word, walked to the gate, and to my shock, slipped between the bars like his body was liquid. Before I could call after him, the gate creaked open on its own, just enough for me to drive through. I don't know what possessed me to follow, but something about the way he moved made it impossible to turn back. I eased forward, headlights cutting into the dark, until I realized the road didn't stop at the gate. It sloped into a tunnel. At first, I thought it was part of the old storm drain system. Los Angeles has miles of hidden channels beneath it, a forgotten underworld where runoff water and, sometimes, people vanish. But this tunnel felt different. The concrete walls were covered in symbols, some painted, some carved deep into the stone. They weren't graffiti. They were older, symmetrical, almost ritualistic. My passenger walked ahead, his shadow stretching unnaturally long in my headlights. "Wait!" I shouted, stepping out of the car. "What is this place?" He didn't turn. His voice echoed down the tunnel. "The city was built on top of bones. This is where they still breathe." I wanted to leave, but when I turned back, the tunnel mouth was gone. Behind me was only darkness, stretching on as far as the eye could see. Panic clawed at me. I ran after him, flashlight shaking in my hand. The tunnel sloped deeper, the air growing colder, the smell stronger, damp earth, rust, and something sweet, like rotting fruit. My beam of light flickered across old alcoves, each one holding fragments, a broken chair, a rusted bicycle, once even what looked like a child's shoe. It felt less like a tunnel and more like a graveyard. Finally, I caught up. The man stood before a massive iron door, bolted shut with chains. He placed a hand on it, and the humming started. Deep, resonant, vibrating through my chest. The same sound I'd heard in nightmares I didn't realize I remembered. He turned to me then, and for the first time I saw his face. His skin was pale, stretched too tightly over his skull. His eyes were solid black, reflecting no light. And when he spoke, his mouth didn't move. The words just filled the tunnel, echoing from everywhere at once. "They are awake." The chains on the door rattled violently. I stumbled back, flashlight beam shaking. From behind the door came a sound like claws scraping metal, followed by a chorus of whispers, hundreds of voices overlapping, too many to understand. The man stepped aside, as if inviting me to open it. I shook my head, heart hammering. "I'm not going near that thing." The whispers grew louder, more urgent, until I could make out fragments. My name. My address. Secrets I had never spoken aloud. I dropped the flashlight, and in the stuttering dark, I swear I saw fingers, long, skeletal fingers, sliding through the cracks between the door and the frame. I ran. I don't remember how I found my car, or how I drove out, but one moment I was in the tunnel, and the next I was speeding down Alameda, the city lights blurring past me. When I pulled over, gasping for air, the passenger seat was wet. Not damp, soaked, as though someone had been sitting there dripping water. On the floor was a single item, a rusted key, its teeth jagged and unfamiliar. I quit driving after that. Couldn't step foot downtown without feeling sick. But the story doesn't end there. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. No words. Just a photo. It was of the tunnel, the iron door wide open, and inside, something massive and shapeless crawling out. In the corner of the image was my car, headlights still on, waiting. And last night, I woke to the sound of chains rattling beneath my apartment. I live on the 12th floor. People always say California is sunshine and beaches, but if you've ever been to the San Bernardino Mountains, you know there's another side, mist-drenched forests, icy lakes, and winding roads that seem to disappear into nowhere. I grew up near Los Angeles, but every winter my family would take trips up to Lake Arrowhead. As a kid, it was magical: snow, fireplaces, the smell of pine. As an adult, I found myself drawn back there, renting cabins for long weekends when I needed a break from the chaos of the city. But in 2019, one of those trips turned into something I'll never forget. Something that still keeps me from driving up that mountain again. Because I found a cabin that shouldn't exist. And inside it, something was waiting. It started when I booked a last-minute trip on a rental app. The cabin didn't have reviews, but the pictures showed a small, rustic place on the lakefront, tucked away from the tourist-heavy parts of town. That appealed to me. I wanted quiet, not crowds. The drive up the winding mountain road was foggy, the kind of fog that makes your headlights feel useless, every tree a looming shadow. When I arrived, the cabin was just as the pictures showed, wooden, old-fashioned, with a creaky porch overlooking the water. Except there was one thing the listing hadn't shown: the windows were boarded up from the inside. I told myself it was probably to keep the cold out. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was wrong. Why board up windows in a rental? Inside, the place smelled faintly of mildew and wood smoke. The furniture was sparse, old, like it hadn't been changed since the 70s. There were no personal touches, no photos, no books, no signs anyone had ever lived there. Just bare walls, a single bed, and in the corner, an antique rocking chair that faced the boarded windows. The first night, I tried to ignore the strangeness. I built a fire, made some tea, and listened to the wind rattle the trees. Around midnight, I heard it, a knock. Not on the door, but on the boards covering the window. Slow, deliberate, like someone tapping their nails. I froze, my cup halfway to my lips. The knock came again, and this time I heard something else, a voice, muffled through the wood. A child's voice. "Let me in. It's cold." I didn't move. Every rational part of me said it was some kind of prank, maybe locals messing with outsiders. But then I remembered, the cabin was far from town. No other houses nearby. No neighbors. And the voice was too soft, too pleading, like it was right on the other side of the boards. I forced myself to check the door. Locked. Then, heart pounding, I peeked through a gap in the boards. The fog was so thick I could barely see the lake. Nothing moved. No footprints in the snow. Just silence. I told myself I was imagining it, maybe the wind playing tricks. I went to bed, though I didn't sleep much. The second night was worse. This time, it wasn't just one knock. It was many. All around the cabin, on every boarded window, in perfect rhythm, like dozens of hands tapping at once. And then the voices started. Not just one child, but several. Boys, girls, whispering together, "Let us in. We're so cold. Please." Their words blended into a chant, rising and falling with the knocking. I pressed myself against the wall, flashlight shaking in my grip. "Who's there?" I shouted. The knocking stopped. The whispers silenced. For a moment, I thought they were gone. Then, from the darkness beyond the boards, a single phrase echoed, "You're in our house." That's when I noticed the rocking chair. It was moving. Slowly at first, then harder, as if someone invisible sat in it, rocking back and forth. I bolted out of the cabin into the freezing night, barefoot in the snow. My phone had no service, the fog thicker than ever. I could barely make out the lake. Desperate, I circled the cabin, trying to see who was tormenting me. And that's when I saw them. Dozens of figures stood along the treeline, barely visible through the mist. Children, pale and motionless, their faces blank, their eyes too dark. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. They just stared. My heart thundered as I stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut. The boards rattled as if struck by many hands at once, and the voices rose again, louder this time, almost screaming, "Our house! Our house! Give it back!" I don't know how long I stayed there, curled in a corner, hands over my ears. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I must have passed out. When I woke, the cabin was silent. The fire had gone cold, the boards still in place. I told myself I had to leave, now. I grabbed my bag, rushed to my car, and didn't look back. But the nightmare didn't end there. When I got home, I checked the rental app to leave a review, warning others about what I'd seen. But the listing was gone. I contacted the company, gave them the address. They told me something that froze my blood. That cabin had burned down in the 1980s. No one had rebuilt it. According to county records, the land was empty. Yet I stayed there. Slept in it. Heard them. Last week, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph, an old black and white picture of children standing in front of that very cabin. The same faces I saw in the fog. And in the window behind them, was me. Standing there. Watching. People usually think of Napa Valley as wine country, rolling hills, vineyards, the clink of glasses at expensive restaurants. It's a place people associate with beauty and luxury. But what most tourists don't know is that tucked among those hills is a history that locals don't like to talk about. An abandoned asylum, closed decades ago, left to rot in the shadows of the vineyards. I never believed the stories until I saw it myself. And what I saw inside still feels like a stain on my mind, something I can't scrub away no matter how hard I try. It began when a friend of mine, Caleb, invited me on a trip. He'd just inherited a small winery from his uncle, and he wanted help cleaning it up. The property was gorgeous, sprawling vines, oak trees heavy with moss, the air thick with the smell of grapes. But at the far edge of the property, past a rusted iron fence, I saw a crumbling building hidden behind tangled brush. The windows were broken, the walls streaked with black mold, and the roof sagged as if it were struggling to hold itself together. "That's the asylum," Caleb told me casually, as though talking about the weather. "It shut down in the 70s. Bad conditions, patients mistreated. Place has been empty ever since." He laughed, though it sounded nervous. "Locals say it's haunted. Kids dare each other to sneak in." Of course, I wanted to see it. I've always been drawn to forgotten places, the weight of history pressing into the walls. Against Caleb's advice, I decided to explore it the following night. Armed with a flashlight and my phone, I slipped out after dinner and crossed the fence. The asylum loomed ahead, a skeleton of what it once was. As soon as I stepped inside, the air shifted. It was colder, thicker, like the building itself was holding its breath. The interior was worse than I expected. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips, doors hung broken from their hinges, and the floors groaned with every step. Graffiti covered nearly every surface, names, symbols, crude drawings, but underneath, I could still see the original paint, pale green, institutional, the color of sterility. My flashlight beam cut across empty rooms filled with rusting bed frames and overturned wheelchairs. I thought I was alone, but then I heard it. Whispering. It was faint, like the rustle of wind through leaves, but it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from deeper inside the asylum. I froze, straining my ears. The whispers grew clearer, more distinct, like multiple voices speaking at once, overlapping in a language I didn't understand. Against all logic, I followed. The sound led me down a hall lined with doors, each marked with a number. The further I went, the stronger the smell became: urine, mold, and something metallic, like dried blood. At the end of the hall, I found a room with its door ajar. Inside was a single chair bolted to the floor, leather straps dangling from the arms. The whispers surged in my head the moment I stepped across the threshold. My flashlight flickered violently, plunging me into near darkness, and in that strobe-like light, I saw shapes, figures, crowded into the corners of the room. Patients, gaunt and pale, their mouths moving in silent screams. I stumbled back, and as I did, something caught my ankle. I looked down to see a hand, skeletal, gray-skinned, reaching up through a crack in the floor. I kicked free and bolted down the hall, heart pounding, the whispers now turning into full-blown cries, wailing in agony. The building shook as if something massive stirred beneath it. I didn't stop until I reached the exit, but when I burst outside, the vineyard was gone. The land around me was barren, dry, nothing but dead earth stretching as far as I could see. The asylum stood alone, its windows glowing with faint light, and from inside came the screams of hundreds. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, and the screen displayed a single message in blood-red letters: "You never left." I don't remember how I got back to Caleb's place. One moment I was staring at the asylum, the next I was waking in his guest room, drenched in sweat. I told myself it was a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But when I checked my phone, the message was still there. And worse, the photos I'd taken inside were gone, replaced by images I never captured. Patients strapped to beds, eyes rolled back. Nurses standing in rows, their faces blank masks. And in the corner of every picture, always watching, was me. Caleb sold the winery a year later. He wouldn't say why. But before he left, he told me one last thing. His uncle, the one who left him the property, hadn't died peacefully like they said. He'd hung himself in that asylum. And in his suicide note, he wrote 6 words. The patients never stopped screaming. Most people know Bodie, California, as a tourist attraction, a ghost town frozen in time, preserved as a state historic park. Families wander its dusty streets, peek inside saloons and old schoolhouses, snap photos of rusty cars left to rot under the desert sun. But what most visitors don't realize is that Bodie isn't just an empty shell of the gold rush era. Some say it's cursed. Others say it's alive. And in 2020, when I drove up there on a solo photography trip, I learned for myself why the locals refused to stay past sunset. It was late September, the kind of dry, biting cold that seeps into your bones even before night falls. I left Los Angeles early and drove north for hours, trading freeways for narrow highways, the landscape flattening into scrub and desert. By the time I reached Bodie, the sun hung low, staining the wooden buildings with a copper glow. There were only a handful of tourists left, and most were heading back to their cars, eager to make it down the winding dirt road before dark. I told myself I'd stay a little longer, get some twilight shots. That decision nearly cost me everything. The town was eerily quiet once the crowd dispersed. Wind moaned through broken windows, dust swirled around my ankles, and the silence of the place pressed on me like a weight. I snapped pictures of the church, its steeple leaning slightly, then of the general store where old cans still sat on shelves, untouched for a century. But as I framed a shot of the saloon, I noticed something strange. In the window, just for an instant, I saw movement. A figure. Someone standing there, watching me. I froze. No other visitors were around. Slowly, I lowered the camera, heart thudding. The window was empty. Just a curtain stirring in the breeze. I told myself it was a trick of light, but unease gnawed at me. Still, I couldn't resist exploring further. I pushed open the saloon doors and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old wood and dust. Tables sat as though abandoned mid-meal, glasses still on counters, poker chips scattered. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud. And then I heard it, a faint piano melody drifting from the far corner, though the piano itself was broken, keys missing, wood warped. The sound was soft at first, then louder, as if invisible fingers pressed the keys. I backed out slowly, my breath ragged, the music following me until I stumbled back onto the street. The sun dipped fully then, and shadows swallowed the town. I knew I should leave, but my car was parked on the far edge, near the old cemetery. As I walked, I realized something was wrong. The street I had entered on wasn't there anymore. Where there should have been a road leading back to the dirt track, there was only more buildings, ones I hadn't seen before, houses with lit lanterns in the windows, smoke curling from chimneys. My camera hung heavy around my neck as I wandered deeper. The town was alive again. Figures moved between the houses, dressed in 19th century clothes, their faces pale and expressionless. They didn't seem to notice me, but I noticed them. And worse, I noticed the way their shadows didn't match. Some cast no shadow at all. Others stretched impossibly long, bending around corners, reaching for me. Panic surged. I sprinted toward where I thought the cemetery was, desperate to find my car, but every turn led me deeper into the town, streets looping back on themselves like a maze. I heard boots crunching behind me, slow and deliberate, as if someone was following but in no rush to catch up. When I finally turned, I saw a man standing in the middle of the street. Tall, gaunt, wearing a miner's hat. His eyes were black hollows, his mouth twisted in a grin too wide for his face. He raised a finger and pointed directly at me. The air grew colder. Around me, the figures stopped what they were doing, turning in unison. Dozens of them. Their faces blank, eyes empty, but their mouths open together, and from them poured a sound I'll never forget, a low, droning chant that shook the ground beneath my feet. My camera clicked by itself, capturing shot after shot as if some unseen force was pressing the shutter. I bolted into the cemetery, weaving through crooked headstones. There, parked by the gate, was my car. Relief nearly dropped me to my knees. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed the lock down. The figures stood just beyond the fence, staring silently as my engine roared to life. I didn't wait. I tore down the dirt road, not daring to look back until I was miles away. When I got home, I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, that I'd panicked and imagined it. But then I checked my camera. Every single photo I'd taken of the town was gone. In their place were dozens of pictures of me. Me, walking through the streets, staring into windows, even standing in the cemetery. All of them shot from angles I couldn't have captured myself. And in the last photo, taken just as I got into my car, the grinning miner stood outside my window. His finger pressed against the glass. Highway 1, the Pacific Coast Highway, is one of the most beautiful drives in the world. Tourists from across the globe come to see it, its winding cliffs, crashing waves, and sunsets that paint the sky in fire. But locals know something darker about it. They know the stories, the accidents, the people who never make it home. Some say it's cursed. Others whisper about the ones who walk its edge at night. I didn't believe any of it until one summer in 2021, when a late-night drive nearly cost me my sanity. Because I picked up someone who wasn't supposed to exist. It was past midnight when I left Big Sur, heading north. The road was quiet, the ocean invisible in the blackness to my left, the cliffs dropping hundreds of feet below. The radio barely picked up a signal, so I drove in silence, my headlights carving two pale tunnels through the fog. About 20 minutes in, I saw her. A young woman walking along the shoulder, barefoot, her white dress whipping in the wind. She raised a hand when my car approached, signaling for me to stop. I hesitated. Who walks here, at this hour, in the dark? But something in me, pity, maybe, pulled the car over. She opened the passenger door and slid in without a word. Her hair was soaked, clinging to her face, and her skin was icy to the touch. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Do you need me to take you somewhere?" She nodded slowly, eyes fixed straight ahead. "Home," she said. "Please, take me home." I asked for an address, but she didn't answer. just lifted one trembling hand and pointed north, further along the highway. The silence between us was suffocating. I kept glancing at her, trying to make sense of it. Her dress wasn't just white, it was old-fashioned, lace at the collar, frayed at the sleeves, like something out of another century. And the smell. Damp salt water clung to her, filling the car. We drove for nearly 20 minutes, the road twisting and turning. Each time I slowed, hoping she'd give me directions, she only whispered, "Further. Just a little further." My nerves prickled. Something about her was off, wrong in a way I couldn't name. Finally, when I couldn't take the silence anymore, I asked, "Where are you coming from? What happened to you?" Her head turned then, slowly, unnaturally, until her eyes locked on mine. They weren't the eyes of someone alive. They were clouded, milky, like waterlogged glass. Her lips parted, and in a voice that wasn't hers, she said, "I never left." The car shuddered. My headlights flickered, and for an instant, the road vanished. I was no longer on Highway 1. I was underwater. Darkness pressed in on every side, bubbles rising past my windshield. The woman sat calmly beside me, her hair floating weightless, her mouth widening into an impossible grin. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering, and suddenly the ocean was gone. The car screeched to a stop on the shoulder of the highway. My chest heaved as I tried to calm myself. I turned to the passenger seat. Empty. I thought maybe I'd imagined her, a trick of exhaustion and fog. But then I saw it, water pooled on the seat, soaking into the fabric. And on the dashboard, carved into the plastic with something sharp, was a single word, home. Shaking, I drove the rest of the way without stopping, not daring to look into the rearview mirror. When I got back to San Francisco, I told a friend what happened. He went pale and told me he'd heard of her before. A woman who drowned when her car went off the cliffs in the 1930s. Locals call her the vanishing hitchhiker. Travelers who pick her up rarely make it back. That night, I tried to sleep, convincing myself it was just an old legend that got into my head. But around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of dripping water. My apartment floor was wet, a trail of footprints leading from the front door to my bed. And standing there in the dark, her voice rasped again, closer this time, almost in my ear. "Take me home." Death Valley is one of the hottest, driest places on Earth. Tourists go for the extremes, the endless sand dunes, the salt flats glistening under the sun, and the isolation that makes you feel like you're on another planet. I went there in 2022, hoping for a solo adventure. I wanted solitude, space to breathe, but what I found was something no human should ever see. Something that exists in the shadows between the sun and the sand, waiting for those foolish enough to enter. I arrived mid-afternoon, my rental SUV rattling over the gravel roads leading to Furnace Creek. The landscape was breathtaking in its severity, jagged mountains in the distance, heat shimmering off the sand, the sky a deep, unbroken blue. I set up camp near Mesquite Flat sand dunes, planning to explore during the golden hour, take photos, and sleep under the stars. But even as I unpacked, I felt a tension in the air, subtle at first, like the desert itself was holding its breath. By sunset, the dunes glowed with fire-orange hues. I wandered out, camera in hand, following the shifting ridges. The wind was unusually still, the usual desert silence thickened into something heavier. And then I saw it, a shadow moving across the dunes. At first, I thought it was a trick of light, a mirage caused by the low sun. But it moved too deliberately, gliding across the sand without leaving a single footprint. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked toward it, the shadow retreating as I approached. The closer I got, the more I noticed details that were impossible, a figure, human-like, but elongated, its limbs stretching unnaturally, swaying as if it were dancing in slow motion. Its head turned, and though there was no face, I felt it watching me. My stomach churned. I told myself to leave, but my feet moved forward, drawn in by a mix of fear and fascination. Night fell fast in Death Valley. The temperature plummeted, the stars so bright it felt like you could reach out and touch them. I realized I had wandered far from my campsite. Panic surged. I turned to leave, but the dunes had shifted. Paths I remembered didn't exist. Every ridge looked identical, and the shadow was behind me now, closer than before, moving with a grace no human could match. I ran. Sand slipped beneath my boots, dragging me down. Every time I thought I could escape, the shadow was there again, gliding silently, no sound, no footprints. My flashlight flickered as I raised it, illuminating nothing, just the empty dunes and my own reflection in the moonlight. Then, faint whispering, almost imperceptible at first, began to fill the air. Voices, soft and urgent, calling my name, repeating it in dozens of variations. Help! Arpan, don't look! I stumbled into a small depression between dunes and hid, chest heaving. My flashlight revealed something horrifying. The sand around me was covered in tiny handprints, human-sized and child-sized, all pointing in my direction. My mind reeled. How could this be? Who, what, could make these? The whispers grew louder, forming sentences I could almost understand. You shouldn't be here. Leave. Or stay forever. Morning came, and the desert returned to its deceptive calm. The shadow was gone, but the handprints remained, scorched into the sand like a warning. I ran to my SUV, determined to leave immediately, only to find the road had disappeared. All around me, the dunes were endless. I realized I hadn't just gotten lost, I had crossed into a part of Death Valley that should not exist. The sun was rising higher, and with it, the temperature. I couldn't stay out here for long. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning. The shadow reappeared as the sun dipped again, taller now, limbs stretching impossibly, stretching across the horizon, moving closer. It didn't walk, it flowed over the dunes, and wherever it passed, the sand blackened, leaving scorched patterns behind. I wanted to scream, but my voice was gone. When I finally saw the park's main road in the distance, relief surged. I ran toward it. My SUV, parked exactly where I left it, was untouched. Exhausted, shaking, I climbed in and locked the doors. But that night, when I tried to sleep under the stars in a safe hotel, I woke to a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, circling my room. And in the corner, the shadow, condensed into a human form now, its head tilted unnaturally. A whisper carried from the darkness. You can leave, but I follow. Death Valley never forgets its own. When I turned on the light, the room was empty. But on my windshield, etched into the glass, were words written from the outside, "See you soon."